All right, so you're interested in the music industry, huh?
Yeah.
Specifically record label contracts. I bet. Because, let's face it, they can be a real head-scratcher, like trying to understand a different language. Likely, you've given me some sources that break things down, and that's exactly what we're going to do today. Think of it like this. A crash course on this crazy, often kind of scary side of the music world.
Yeah, you're right. You've got some really useful documents here laying out all the essential stuff. What we want to do is get to the heart of it all. Like the stuff that really, really matters for anyone trying to make it in music. We're going to shine a light on all the power plays and the money stuff that goes down in these contracts.
Awesome. Let's jump right in. At its core, a record contract is basically the big agreement between a musician that could be you listening right now and a record label. It's often seen as like this dream come true, like the moment you finally hit the big time.
Yeah.
But there's also this worry, right, about getting screwed over. This document, this contract, it basically controls everything. Your creative freedom, where your career goes, and most importantly, your bank account. So where do we even begin with all this legal mumbo-jumbo?
Well, the first thing to wrap your head around is the lingo. These contracts are full of words that only music industry folks use, kind of like learning a secret code. And one of the first words you're going to come across is advance. What do you think that means for an artist?
An advance. Okay, so that's like the money you get up front when you sign the deal, right? It's got to feel pretty amazing, I imagine. Like the label saying, hey, we believe in you, and backing it up with cold, hard cash. But there's a catch, isn't there? It's not exactly free money, is it? More like a loan.
You got it. That's the big thing to understand right away. That money, it's an investment the label is making. They're betting on you, and they expect to get that money back. And how much you get up front, that can be all over the place. A newbie just starting out might get a smaller amount compared to someone who's already got fans or a couple of hit songs. Another thing to remember is that money isn't just for you to spend however you want. It usually has to go towards recording your album, sometimes even your living expenses while you're working on it.
Okay, so you get this advance, use it for the music, maybe help pay the bills for a bit. But the key thing is recoupment. Can you explain exactly what that means?
Recoupment is how a label gets back all that dough they shelled out for you. And I mean all of it, not just the advance. We're talking everything. Studio time, producers, the musicians you hire, but also the marketing stuff like ads and radio play, the album art, the printing of CDs or vinyl, even the cost of getting your music on streaming services and in stores. That all adds up to the total that needs to be recouped. And here's a scary fact from your sources, a reality check for most musicians. A whopping 80% of albums never recoup.
Whoa, 80%. That really puts things in perspective. So even if you've got this amazing album out there, even if people are listening to it, if it hasn't made enough money to cover all those costs, you don't see a penny in royalties beyond that initial advance.
That's the hard truth. And then you've got this thing called cross-collateralization. This is where things get even trickier. Basically, the label can lump all the money you owe them from all your different albums into one big pile. So let's say your first album flops, doesn't make enough money to cover what they spent. Well, any money you make from your next album, even if it's a huge hit, can go towards paying off that old debt. It's like a safety net for the label, but for artists, it can make it really tough to ever start seeing any real profit. Your sources mentioned that some contracts might have a clause where after a certain time the debt disappears, but it's definitely not the norm.
Wow, so the label makes sure they get their money back first. Okay, but what about the artist's cut? That's where the royalty rate or points come in, right? What kind of percentages are we talking here?
Yeah, the royalty rate, or sometimes they call it points, it's the percentage of the money made from selling and streaming your music that goes to you. At first glance, it might seem decent. Big labels usually offer something between 10 and 15%. Smaller, independent labels, maybe 9 to 12%. But, and this is a big BUT, that percentage is usually based on the price of a physical CD or vinyl in a store. And there are a lot of other things that get a lower rate. International sales, discounted albums, and of course, in today's world, digital downloads and streaming.
Right, so that initial 10 to 15% can shrink pretty fast. You also mentioned deductions. What kind of expenses get taken out of that already kind of small slice of the pie?
Oh, there are several things that can eat into your earnings. You don't get royalties on promotional copies. Those are the ones they send to radio stations or reviewers to get the word out. Then there's packaging, those physical albums. The label often takes out a big chunk, maybe 15 to 30%, for the jewel case, the artwork, any printed stuff inside. It's wild that even in this digital age, some of those old deductions still exist, or they've got digital equivalents. Plus, lots of times, the royalty rate you see is an all-in rate.
Hold on, all in, what does that even mean?
All in means that you, the artist, might have to pay other people involved in making the record, like the producer, out of your own share. Producer fees can easily be around 3% of the sale price, and that comes straight from your initial 10 to 15%. So when you add up all these deductions, that royalty rate doesn't look quite as nice anymore. Your sources are absolutely right to point out how much these deductions can chip away at your actual income.
Okay, this is giving us a really clear picture of how the money works, or doesn't work, for artists. Now let's talk about where the music can be sold. That's all about the territory, right? What kind of geographical area does a typical record deal cover?
The territory in the contract basically spells out where the label can sell you music. Big labels, almost always, they want a worldwide deal. That means they have the exclusive rights to sell and distribute your music in every single country. Smaller, independent labels, they might be more open to splitting up the territory, so they might only have the rights for certain regions or countries. This is a big deal for artists to think about. Let's say you've got a solid fan base in a certain part of the world. Maybe you want to keep the rights for that area and try to get a better deal somewhere else.
Makes sense, got to be strategic. So the label gets the rights to sell your music in certain places. But what exactly are they getting the rights to? That's where the whole idea of the master recording or masters comes in. What are those, and who usually ends up owning them after signing a deal?
The master recording is like the final, perfect version of your song, the one everyone hears. Record contracts are all about who owns the rights to these recordings. And most of the time, the artist gives up the copyright to the recording. They call it the master right, to the label. This means the label gets to decide how that recording is used, copied, distributed, put on streaming services, everything.
So the label basically owns the original recording.
hmm
That feels like giving up a lot of power. Let's move on to another biggie. Exclusivity. What does this usually mean for the artist?
Exclusivity is pretty standard in record contracts. It means that for as long as the contract lasts, you can only record music for that specific label. You can't just go and make an album with another label without their permission. This applies to you, the performer, and also any songs you write during the contract period. It's funny though, you're bound to them, but they can sign as many other artists as they want. They're not tied to just you. There's usually a sideman clause that you might want to negotiate. Let's say you want a guest on a friend's independent EP, play some guitar while you're still under contract. This clause makes it clear that it's okay, it doesn't break your contract.
So you're locked in with one label for a certain amount of time. That brings us to the term of the contract. How long do these things usually last?
The term is just a fancy way of saying how long the contract is in effect. Usually there's an initial period, maybe around a year, where you're supposed to finish your first album. But then there are options, which we'll get to in a bit. The label usually has the option to extend the contract for more time, maybe another year at a time, and it could end up being a commitment for several albums. Your sources mention it could go up to 7 years or 7 albums. The term can also be tied to certain milestones, like releasing an album or when digital downloads become available. It's usually a good idea for artists to try and get a long stop clause. This sets a limit, a maximum amount of time for the whole contract, no matter how many times the label extends it. And something we're seeing more of now is labels adding longer waiting periods before you can re-record your own music after the contract ends. That's a whole other aspect of the term to watch out for.
Okay, so those options are pretty important. It's not like a guarantee for multiple albums, is it? It's more like the label gets to decide if they want more albums from you.
Exactly. An option gives the label the right, but not the obligation, to keep the contract going after that initial period. Whether they choose to extend it usually depends on how well your first album does, how many copies it sells, or how many streams it gets. If it doesn't meet their expectations, they might just let the contract end there. So when you see a contract talking about a multi-album deal, it usually means the label has the option to release that many albums, not that they have to.
Got it. So you poured your heart into the music, you're proud of it. Now you got to officially deliver it. What does that actually involve, and what are these delivery requirements all about?
Delivery is just the process of you, the artist, giving the finished recordings to the label. But it's not as simple as emailing them a file. The contract will have specific delivery requirements, basically standards your recordings have to meet. They'll expect professional sound quality and material that they think can sell well. They might also specify things like how long the album has to be, how many songs it needs, what the cover art should look like, all that jazz. Then, the label will take some time to review everything you've given them and decide if it meets their standards.
And what if they're not happy with what you deliver? What happens then? I see the term acceptable recordings here. That sounds pretty objective.
It can be, yeah, unfortunately. The contract usually says your recordings have to be acceptable to the label, and they often use phrases like technically and commercially satisfactory.
Yeah.
This gives them a lot of power because they can reject recordings they don't think will sell, even if you, as the artist, are totally happy with them. This can cause a lot of arguments and delays in getting your music out there.
Man, that really shows you the power imbalance sometimes. Okay, now let's talk about your own songs. If you're a songwriter, there's this thing called controlled compositions. What's that all about?
Controlled compositions are the songs that you, the artist, wrote, co-wrote, or own the publishing rights to. Record labels love to put a controlled composition clause in their contracts to limit how much they have to pay you in mechanical royalties for those songs. Usually they'll agree to pay only 75% of the standard mechanical royalty rate, and they might even set a limit on how many songs on an album get that reduced rate. This can be a real kick in the pants for singer-songwriters because mechanical royalties are a big part of their income when their songs get pressed on CDs and vinyl or sold as downloads. So if you're writing your own hits, the label might actually pay you less for those than they would for songs written by someone else. Something to think about.
So they pay you less for the songs you write than for songs by other people. Doesn't seem very fair. Okay, let's talk about some of the newer types of deals. 360 deals seem to be a hot topic. What are they all about?
A 360 deal is basically a wider-reaching agreement. The label wants a cut of more than just your music sales. They want a piece of everything: touring, merchandise, publishing royalties, endorsements, even acting gigs. Their reasoning is that record sales have gone down, and they're invested in your whole career, not just your music. They want to share in all your success. But lots of artists aren't happy with these deals. They think it gives the label way too much control and a bigger chunk of their earnings than they deserve. It's a trade-off, really. More support and help with your career, but in exchange, they get a percentage of everything you make for a long time.
Seems like the label wants to spread out their bets and get a return on everything you do. Now, what about when music gets used in other media, like movies and TV shows? That's licensing, right?
You got it. In music contracts, licensing means giving someone permission to use your copyrighted material, either the actual recording or the song itself, for a specific purpose, in a specific place, and for a certain amount of time. For example, a label might license one of your songs for a movie soundtrack. It's basically a temporary handover of rights. You or the label still own the copyright. Artists who paid for their own recordings might actually seek out licensing deals so they can keep owning their masters and just let the label handle distribution and promotion for a little while.
So it's like temporary permission. But what about permanently giving up rights? That sounds more like assignment of copyright.
Assignment of copyright is a much bigger deal. It means you completely transfer ownership of the copyright in your music or recording to someone else, usually the label or a publisher. When you assign copyright, you're basically saying, you own this now for a set period of time, which can be a really long time, sometimes even your entire lifetime plus some years. Whoever you assign it to, they get full control over how your work is used and sold. This is a big decision, not something to take lightly.
Definitely something to think long and hard about.
Yeah.
Now, what if an artist just wants help getting their music out to more people? That's where a distribution deal comes in.
Right. A distribution deal is where you, as the owner of your master recordings, let a distribution company or a label handle getting your music to stores, streaming services, all that. Their main job is making sure people can actually buy and listen to your music. With a distribution deal, you usually keep the copyright. The distributor gets a percentage of the sales and streams for their work. It's more about providing a service than owning your music.
More like a partnership.
Yeah.
Now, what about when an artist wants more freedom and flexibility in their career? There's this thing called a non-exclusive recording contract. How does that work?
A non-exclusive recording contract lets you give the copyright for certain recordings to a label, but you're not bound to them for everything you do in the future. You're free to work with other labels and do different projects. This can be a good option for artists who just want to license a couple of tracks without signing their life away, or as a way to test the waters with a label before committing fully.
That sounds like a good way to keep your options open.
Yeah.
Now let's talk about those situations where an artist gets hired to create music for a specific project. That sounds like work for hire or a buyout.
Exactly. Work for hire is when someone hires you to create music for something like a film, a commercial, or a video game. They basically buy all the rights to the recording up front for a fixed price, and you don't get any royalties from it later on. A buyout is similar. It's a one-time payment for the full rights to an existing piece of music. You're basically selling it outright.
So no ongoing income from the recording itself in those cases. Let's talk a bit more about songwriter royalties. There are mechanical royalties and performance royalties. What's the difference?
Mechanical royalties are paid to songwriters and publishers every time their song is reproduced, like when CDs are made or when someone buys a digital download. Important to note, this doesn't include streaming. That falls under performance royalties. These royalties are usually collected and paid out by publishers or rights organizations. Performance royalties, on the other hand, are paid when a song is played publicly. Think radio, live concerts, and importantly, streaming on Spotify, Apple Music, all those. These are collected by performing rights organizations or PROs like ASCAP, BMI, and CSAC. So every time your song plays on Spotify, that's a performance royalty for you and your publisher.
Okay, so mechanical is for copying the song and performance is for playing it publicly. Got it.
Now, what about when music is used in visual media, like movies or TV? That needs a synchronization license, or sync license for short. How does that work? A sync license gives someone permission to use a copyrighted song in something visual, like a film, TV show, commercial, or video game. To get a sync license, you actually need to license both the actual recording, which the label usually controls, and the song itself, which is handled by the songwriter and publisher. The money from sync licenses is split between whoever owns the recording and whoever owns the publishing rights. The details of that split are usually spelled out in the record contract.
Makes sense. You need clearance for both the specific recording and the song itself. Now, back to the label's role in getting the music out there. We talked about the marketing commitment or minimum marketing spend. What does that actually obligate the label to do?
The marketing commitment, or minimum marketing spend, means the label agrees to spend a certain amount of money on marketing and promoting your music. This could include online ads, getting your song on the radio, PR stuff, all that. A lot of times, this marketing money is also treated as an advance, so you have to earn it back through your royalties. Getting a strong marketing commitment is super important for artists to make sure the label is actually going to put some muscle behind getting your music heard.
Definitely. What's the point of a great album if no one knows about it? On the other hand, what about making sure the music actually gets released? That's where the guaranteed release clause comes in, right?
Absolutely. A guaranteed release clause is a must-have for any artist. It legally forces the label to release your music according to what's agreed upon in the contract. This is different from an option, where they just have the choice to release it or not. A guaranteed release makes sure your music will actually be available to the public within a specific time frame. Without it, there's a risk the label could sign you and then just decide not to release anything, leaving your music unheard.
That'd be a nightmare. Okay, we talked about this before, but let's go back to cross-collateralization one more time to make sure everyone really gets it.
Cross-collateralization basically lets the label take any money you owe them from different projects and combine it all together. So if you're still in debt from your first album, they can take money from your next album, even if it's super successful, to pay off that old debt. This can make it take way longer for you to actually start making money, as profits from successful albums get used to cover losses from older ones. It's a way for the label to protect their investment over the long haul.
Wow. The money stuff in these contracts is seriously complicated and can have a big impact on how much an artist actually earns. We've covered a ton of specific jargon, so let's zoom out a bit. What are some of the big picture clauses that artists really need to watch out for?
Yeah, understanding the heart of the contract is super important. We've talked about some of these already, but some of the really important ones are the grant of rights clause. This determines who ultimately controls your music in the long run. As we said, licensing is usually better for artists who want to get full ownership back eventually. The exclusivity clause can really limit who you can work with, so think carefully about what exceptions you might need, like that sideman clause. The term and options clauses lay out how long you're tied to the label, and it's always smart to push for shorter initial terms and fewer options. A long stop clause is a good idea too. And don't forget about territory. Think strategically about where you want your music to be available and whether a global deal is really the best way to start. And those delivery requirements and acceptability clauses, try to get them to use clear, objective language that focuses on the technical stuff rather than just what the label thinks will sell.
We also can't forget about all those financial clauses. Royalties and recoupment are obviously huge. What about making sure the label actually puts in the effort to promote your music?
That's where the marketing commitment, or minimum marketing spend, comes in. Don't be afraid to negotiate and get a real concrete commitment from them on how they're going to promote your music. And to make sure your music doesn't just sit on a shelf after you finish it, the release commitment or guaranteed release clause is super important. This ensures your music actually gets out to the public within a reasonable time frame. Beyond these, pay close attention to the breach and termination rights. What happens if the label doesn't hold up their end of the bargain? You need to know how and when you can get out of the contract. Key man provisions can be important too, especially if your relationship with the label depends heavily on one specific person there. And for bands, group provisions are crucial to figure out what happens if someone leaves or the band breaks up.
It sounds like a legal jungle out there. Let's dive back into the money stuff for a minute. We know that advances are basically loans that you have to pay back. What's the typical flow of money in a record deal?
Okay, so first you get the advance, which is usually for recording the album and sometimes for living expenses while you're working on it. Some labels use a recording fund that includes both the album budget and your advance. Once you deliver the finished music, the label starts racking up expenses. Manufacturing, CDs, and vinyl, marketing, distribution, all that spending is basically debt that you, the artist, have to pay back through your royalties. Remember those royalty rates we talked about? The percentage of each sale that's supposed to be yours, well, that money first goes towards paying off all that debt. Only after the label has recouped all their expenses do you start seeing any actual money in your pocket. And remember all those deductions we talked about and how many albums never even recoup. It means a lot of artists might only ever see that initial advance payment. And as we discussed, cross-collateralization can make things even more complicated and drag out that process.
Man, it really seems like making a decent living in music can be a huge struggle for artists under these traditional contracts. Let's switch gears a bit and talk about the different types of record deals out there. We've mentioned a few, but can you give us a rundown of the main categories?
Sure. The most common type is the exclusive recording agreement, where the label pays for everything and in return gets exclusive rights to your music. Then there are licensing deals, where you, the artist, keep ownership of your recordings and just give the label permission to distribute and promote them for a certain time and in certain places. This type of deal is becoming more and more popular. Distribution deals are focused on getting your music out to the public after you've already recorded it, and you usually keep the copyright. Non-exclusive recording contracts let you give copyright for specific recordings without being tied to one label for all your future work. We've also talked about 360 deals, where the label wants a cut of everything you do. Then there's the music composition and recording service contract, which is basically a work-for-hire type of deal. And finally, there's the recording and publishing agreement on certain recordings, where the label gets both the recording and publishing rights for specific songs. Each type of deal has different consequences when it comes to owning your music, creative control, and how much money you can make.
That's a great overview of the different deal options. Okay, let's bring it back to you, our listener, especially if you're a musician trying to make it in this industry. What are the key things to remember from all this?
If you're an aspiring artist, understanding all this stuff is crucial. First, the financial implications. You need to be realistic about how much money you might make, factoring in advances, royalty rates, deductions, and what type of deal you're signing. Don't just get caught up in the upfront money, think about the long game. Second, think about control and ownership. How much creative control and ownership are you willing to give up in exchange for the label's support? Licensing deals, for example, give you more ownership but maybe less money upfront. Be careful about clauses like commercially acceptable, which can limit your creative freedom. Think about your career trajectory. How might the length of the contract, the options the label has, release commitments, and 360 deals affect your career path? Finally, know your negotiation power. Things like how many fans you have, the quality of your recordings, and how much interest labels are showing in you will affect how much leverage you have to get a good deal. And I can't stress this enough. Get a good entertainment lawyer before you sign anything. They can guide you through all this and fight for your best interests.
Yeah, a lawyer is a must-have in this business. Okay, we all know the music industry is always changing. What are some of the big trends we're seeing in record contracts these days?
The digital world has turned everything upside down. We're seeing the impact of digitalization and streaming everywhere. Labels are trying to figure out how to deal with lower streaming royalties, and artists are pushing for fairer ways to get paid. 360 deals are still around, but people are starting to question whether they're really fair to artists. More and more, artists are seeking more control, wanting to own their master recordings like Taylor Swift did. Independent distribution platforms are giving artists more power than ever before. What's interesting is that some major labels are making changes in re-recording restrictions, making artists wait even longer before they can re-record their own music after their contract ends. This could have a big impact on who controls an artist's older work. And we're also seeing more and more licensing deals as artists, especially those who paid for their recordings themselves, choose to keep ownership of their masters and just let the label handle distribution for a while. This could mean a shift towards more power for artists in some parts of the industry.
So lots of changes happening, and artists are definitely becoming more aware of their options. So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the most important thing we've learned about record label contracts?
The big takeaway is this. Understanding record contracts gives artists the power to make smart decisions about their careers. It helps them protect their rights and navigate the music industry, knowing the financial realities and what they might be giving up.
And the single most important piece of advice we've given you today.
Don't sign anything without talking to an experienced entertainment lawyer. These contracts can have long-lasting effects, so getting professional advice is crucial.
Couldn't agree more. And on that note, here's something to ponder as you continue on your musical journey. With the music world changing so fast and artists wanting more control, how might record deals evolve to create a more balanced and fair partnership between artists and labels? That's something worth thinking about as the industry keeps changing. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.